Welcome to Co-Branded, your go-to source for brand strategy, design, and business insights.
Whether you're just starting out or leveling up, we're here to help you build your brand with confidence.
Let's dive in. So Zuza,
Hi.
how's it going?
Good.
Good, awesome. So today I'd like to talk a little bit of foundational branding stuff, like simply what is branding? I think a lot of people don't understand the nuances of what branding is, and a lot of people just think that it's marketing, and I think we need to dispel that as not the truth and dive into some of the things that we think are critical to branding and just to give people a good foundational understanding about what branding is.
I think that's a great idea.
So
Let's do it.
So what is branding to you? Like your kind of key takeaway from what branding is?
There is the saying, I think it's actually Marty Neumeyer that said it, the brand gap and zigzag. Branding is what they say about you when you leave the room. So ultimately it is the opinion, it's your everything that you do that people know that they associate with the brand, basically. And there's so many different elements to it. And it's definitely not just your logo.
Yeah, that's well put. I definitely think that's a really important thing to give distinction to. A lot of people just assume like, oh yeah, I have my brand. Like I paid for a logo or I picked a color. And those pieces are really important to what your brand is, but your brand isn't just that one thing. It's everything that makes up your culture and your organization and how you speak to the world. I always say it's the perception they hold in their mind when they think about you. I came across a meme recently that I thought summed it up pretty well in terms of marketing is you asking your crush out on a date, and branding is the reason they would say yes.
I have to agree with that.
Yeah. And I just thought that was a really clear distinction. And I think it's relatable that most people can, okay, who I am or the person's perception of me is the decision factor.
Yeah.
And marketing is the way that you get in front of those customers or your audience or your people that you're trying to reach. And I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of sum it up in a, semi-relatable way that people can kind
of... Absolutely. But it's interesting because when you were talking about it, it made me think about many different situations when clients will expect the branding people to do marketing and expect the marketing people to do branding.
I think creatives and designers should have an understanding of marketing and how they need to approach selling or promoting whatever they're working on, because I think that gives you context of, okay, the messaging is this, or we're trying to reach this audience and they care about this. And I think it's really important that you have a baseline understanding of those things as a creative. And as a marketer, you should have a baseline understanding about why you're doing the things you're doing, not just we have to be in front of this person. And if that brand strategy or the branding touch points aren't consistent, if the messaging is different in these different scenarios, you're not going to have that really clear path line for this customer to make a decision, purchase, or whatever you're trying to do at that moment. But yeah, so your branding, it's more than your logo.
Yes, it is.
Yes, absolutely. And I look at it in terms of, to me, branding there's two parts of it, and I think you and I have a very similar graphic, which I believe I stole from you. But it's an iceberg, and I think that's really just kind of clarifies the point. But to me, there's brand strategy or brand discovery, which is a part of that process. And that's below the fold. Those are understanding your values, working on your customer personas, creating the strategy itself. And then there's brand activation, which is what is the front end. It's what your customers and your audience sees. Those are things like your logo, your social media, your collateral. It's the picture that you're putting out to the public. There's so many pieces of both of those aspects. You have a slightly different take on how you describe it. I describe it as brand strategy and brand activation, but how do you distinguish between those kind of two factors of a brand?
So, yes, absolutely agree. There's a lot of things that people can't see. Oftentimes that part of the work is omitted. People don't do the brand strategy and then they go right into brand design. Brand design to me is creating a brand, is giving it a personality, designing whole experiences like this. It's a vast thing. There's a lot of things that go into brand identity design. However, is more specialized, right? So that would be your logo, your color palette, your typefaces, your layouts, all the things that it's basically visual communication.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out that doesn't make sense to me that we call brand identity the stuff that we see. I think it should be the other way around, right? I really do. I think
Sure, in terms of identity is who you are, and okay.
so. That really kind of rubs me the wrong way. Like, but at the same time, we have to use it this way so that people understand what we're talking about, right?
Sure.
Maybe we'll be the people to change it.
I call it the visual language. I
Yeah.
don't call it. I mean, identity suite. Sure, I'll use that in terms of collateral, logo. Kind of like the baseline understanding of what you look like. But it's so much beyond that. There's so many pieces to that puzzle that I do refer to it as the visual language. And we'll kind of get into that. There's 5 critical things that I think any business of any size needs to establish their brand from a beginning standpoint. So we can touch on some of those. But yes.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I'm already lost because there's so many things I want to talk about. But this is the interesting thing, because when you said visual language, and to me, actually, brand identity is even more than that, because visuals are an outcome. It's what people see. But why it is the way that it is, plus the messaging, right? Like, what kinds of things are we talking about? How are we talking about them? Who are we talking to? That's not a visual thing.
Yeah.
But that's the context of where the brand lives, and you can't take it out of the context, right? It's not the same for everyone, so It has to be specific.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to I like to use the word intentional. Mm-hmm. When we do brand workshops with clients, one of the questions that I ask the stakeholders within that organization is, what's your culture? Because again, I think there's a really specific piece of branding and culture go hand in hand, and you can't really separate the two.
Right.
You can intentionally set the culture. And I think that's really important for people to understand, is that just because there's a culture doesn't necessarily mean that you did it on purpose. It may just be the CEO's attitude or the leadership's mentality about things. But the more that you do that with intention, the more that it can be powerful. It has to be natural and authentic, but the more that you can actually be intentional with it allows you to curate and push that forward so that way other audiences can see it as well.
Yes. It's almost like having someone who works at home and then they work out and that's all they do, but you're telling them to wear a tuxedo, right? Like, those are the kinds of situations, and it happens a lot because, like you said, if the culture is not intentionally created or organically created, which is, I think, even better, because that means that the people that you're hiring are kind of...
But if you don't set it, then no one knows what culture they're coming into. So again, I think understanding your culture, allowing it to be what it is. You're not trying to fake your culture,
right,
but you're being intentional with what it is and how you want to cultivate that. Because the more that you understand your culture and your brand, the easier it is to have people come on board that follow that or understand or that want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a large tangent we just went on, but I think it's really critical to the idea of what branding is.
Yes, absolutely. Well, actually, I want to ask you, which comes first? Is it the culture or the branding?
So I think you can't stop culture.
Mm-hmm.
So culture is always first, because there's always going to be some form of culture there. And people have to say, okay, we like this culture, or I understand what our culture is because of my beliefs as an owner or our mission as a company. Mm-hmm. And then from that, then you can start to establish, what is our branding? How do we apply our brand to this culture? How do we take our culture and put it into a brand form that everybody can understand it, everybody can get on board with it. So yeah, I think culture is just naturally there, but the more that you can curate it and make sure it's authentic, I think it's easier to translate that into branding.
Well said. And mic drop.
Well,
thank you. And mic drop.
Thank you. I can't drop.
It is very important, but that's a whole nother topic for another podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And even you brought up the idea of rebrand. On our list of things to talk about is what we're calling brand evolution, which goes into those concepts of, well, what's a rebrand? What's a pivot? What's a modern facelift of this brand? Maybe the brand's the same, but it's just outdated or hasn't, the color palette needs to change. Like there's lots of caveats to how you can brand or rebrand something, but that's a whole nother discussion that we'll get into.
I can't wait for that one.
Be good.
Yeah, because it happens so much that people show up and they're like, yeah, I need rebranding. It's like, no. You need new brand identity, not the same thing. But anyway, right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the 5 things that I think are critical for any business. And it's not an exhaustive list, but these are a really great starting point for business of any size, to be honest. Whether it's, a solopreneur or just kind of getting their idea off the ground, or it's an established company that just maybe didn't put the time or money into investing in branding, but they've grown to a point where they need to define what that is, whether to growth or simply just realign the organization and make sure that they're all moving in the same direction. But so I'll go over the 5 and then we can kind of dive a little bit into them. The first one is define your why, what, and how. That is really why your organization exists, not from we want to make money standpoint, but what's your mission? What are you doing for the world? What are you trying to accomplish with your organization or effort? The second one is defining your brand narrative. So it's the voice that you speak in. It's the feeling that you want your audience to have when they interact with your brand. And then also the impact. And that's the brass tacks. What are you actually providing for your audience? That could be a product, a service. It can be anything. And the third one is define your primary customer persona. Any business should understand who their audience is.
Got to know who you're talking.
You got to. I mean, because otherwise you the messaging that you use won't land. The visuals, you have to understand your primary persona. The fourth one is having some sort of messaging framework. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be, you can have this full brand voice document that really goes over like instances of what you say when, but as long as you have some form of repeatable terminology, repeatable statement, we call them boilerplate statements. That way, when you talk in different situations, it's consistent to a point. That's really important. And then the fifth one is, like I mentioned earlier, the visual language. Like, what do you look like? What is that aesthetic that your audience sees? If you have those 5 things, you're off to a really good start. You can do a lot with just those 5. There's plenty more to that mix, but those are the critical things that people need to at least get going and have an intentional, established brand.
I agree. You are right. You're correct. Well, it's interesting because when you started talking about why, what, and how, Simon Sinek, I think it would be very valuable for people to watch the video.
Yeah, watch the video. He has a book called Start With Why. That's essentially that concept. Again,
everyone is doing
everybody is, but it's really important. It's easy to say, what do you do and how do you do it? We are brand designers or brand strategists, and we provide design and strategy. It's easy to understand that. If you're a pool company, we build pools. Okay, well, why do you build pools? What's the why behind it? Is it to create experiences for families? Is it to bring people closer together, to enjoy the outdoors, to be healthy, active lifestyle, to be in the sun? Like, the why is harder to define, but it's really critical that allows you to have a distinction point in the market. We talked about in a different episode about the product is the same. I think it was hamburgers. And, but if you have, we won't go into all that, but it's any product. It could be a tchotchke. Sure. And if everybody just has the same exact tchotchke, what's going to make them stand out?
I'm sorry, what's tchotchke?
Tchotchke, it's just like an object. It's like it could be anything. Like it's just like a.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, English second.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. A thingamabob, a whoosy, what's it? A whatchamacallit.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
No, I know.
But yeah, so it's just anything. But your brand and your marketing is what's going to make you stand above something else. Liquid death.
Yep.
It's just water. It's just water, like every other water out there.
Sure.
But they've invested heavily into being different from a branding and marketing perspective. So if you understand your why, it allows you to be unique in the market and have a sense of ownership and uniqueness to where, other people can't touch that. Or no, that's a MC Hammer line.
Can't touch that.
Yeah.
I agree. And it's liquid death is speaking to a particular person, and it's very clear and it's very visible. And that goes back to what you're saying about defining the people that you're talking to. And actually, I was scrolling through Instagram and someone had a bunch of different questions to their customers. And it's like, what kind of content do you want to see from us? Or what do you struggle with? What is your goal? And all these things. And it was like a series of 5-6 questions. But because you're told that you need to interact with your audience, which is great, and you should. But to me, that actually means that you don't know your customer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of course, it would be. I think it's valuable to have conversations with them. But now it's just like you're kind of, throwing spaghetti out there and seeing what sticks. And because apparently you don't know what kind of content to share with them to help them. And that to me is just a deep misunderstanding of who you're talking to.
I could see both sides of the coin there. I could see it as maybe they didn't do the due diligence ahead of time to be able to say, this is who we're speaking to and this is what we're trying to do. Maybe they're using that as the discovery mechanism. Maybe they're just like, hey, what do you guys want to talk about? What do you want to hear? And then they're going to use that to establish their brand. Who knows? I don't know. I don't think that there's any wrong way to gather data or information from your audience. Again, maybe they're not doing that. At least my mind goes, oh, maybe they're trying to find out who their audience is. But yeah, who knows in that instance? Yeah, there was something that I was going to say and I can't remember what it was. So no, absolutely no.
Tangent.
No, it wasn't, because it was something about you just said in terms of the social media stuff. But yeah, social media is I'll call it a necessary evil these days, and you need to be there. But yeah, that's just another piece of the puzzle. Again, like how you are on social media will be dictated by your brand, by the 5 critical things about how you speak to your audience. What do you look like? What are you trying to get across? What's your messaging? And who's your audience?
Yeah, I want to make this conversation a little more dramatic and completely disagree with you when you said, because you said it's necessary evil. Honestly, I see yes and no, because I see a lot of businesses that are doing really well and they're actually moving their presence into the real analog world, or they target their people. Target, that sounds awful, but they communicate with their people directly. So for example, through email. So there are a lot of companies that are doing very well for themselves, but they completely ditched social media. I mean, they're there, but they haven't posted in 2, 3, 4 years, and they're actually doing really well. I think there's a lot of value in the right companies being on social media if they need it, but not everyone has to.
Yes, it's strategic. It needs to be strategic. Yeah. And that's probably honestly a good topic about social media and things like that. But it's dependent on the business. If you have an incredibly corporate B2B kind of organization, SaaS company, you probably don't necessarily need it if that's not where your audience is going to be. So yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah. You have to find the target and the channels. I was trying to think of the word channels. The channels that work for you as an organization. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Last thing I'm going to say about this is, honestly, when you're struggling to put out quote unquote content out there and you're thinking, oh my God, I should be on Instagram and I should have like content strategy for the next month and doing all these things, and then you're getting prompts like that are somewhat generic. Yeah. I'm like, then why are you doing this? You know what I mean? You're spinning your wheels and it's exhausting for you. But the reality of it is, social media, I think, works great for people who know what they want to say and they're just using it as a tool. Not to even mention that, I mean, it's an ocean, right? Like of so many different, there's so much content. It's just unbelievable. But it's interesting to me that like, if you have to force yourself, then maybe you don't have anything to say or you don't know what you want to say, right? But for people who are clear on that, it's just a tool. Yeah.
And they're all tools. I mean, you mentioned email, and it's still an incredibly powerful channel. For the right companies, and if you do it right. So, people are like, oh, email's dead. It's not true.
God, no, absolutely not.
People still use it very successfully. So yeah, it's all about what works for your business, for your channels, and where your customers are. So it's important. And again, like you talked about, I don't know what to say on social, or I don't know what to post in content. Like this will help you establish that. Again, like the second one is the brand narrative, and that allows you to define how you speak to your audience. Are you caring and empathetic? Are you direct and blunt? Even we think about it in terms of the archetype conversation we just recently had, that goes hand in hand to where if you're an outlaw or if you're a caregiver, those can apply to how you're speaking to your audience. And in terms of the feeling is, what do you want your audience to feel when they interact with you? Do they want to feel safe? Do they want to feel excited? Do they want to feel deliberate? There's adjectives upon adjectives that you can use to describe this. And that's why it's an important exercise, because it allows you to niche down and define who you are as an organization. And then the last one is the impact, which is the how or the what of what you're providing. But what's the thing that they're getting value from you? Is the actual object? Are they buying a piece of software? Are they buying shoes or sneakers?
But you're never really buying a piece of software, and you're never really buying shoes. You know what I mean? It's right. Like,
yes. Yeah. I want you to talk more about that, because that's a really, really good point.
Okay, so right now.
Well, yeah, keep going. Okay. No, because that ties right into the brand narrative.
Yeah, well, okay, so I had this example with toothpaste, right? Are you really buying toothpaste? And the reality of it is that you think you're buying toothpaste, but the commercial is showing someone who is so confident and radiant and has a lot of friends and is just out there in the world. Whether you know it or not, you're buying that. And it is so interesting because the vast majority of decisions that we make are emotional. We don't even know that. But then we rationalize it after we've already made that decision. So what I'm saying is, when you said, can't remember exactly, but it was about what do you want your audience to feel? Yeah. Right? If I have a brand that doesn't make me feel anything, I'm not connected to them. Mm-hmm. Why would I give them my money? Yeah.
No,
So
absolutely. And I think it's really important that people understand that. And again, like we know that inherently just because of what we're doing or because of what we've done for so long, but that's really important because the toothpaste example, you're selling the confidence of having a beautiful smile or the radiance of being in a public setting and feeling good and confident. And that's really important to understand. And that gets more into the really deep nitty gritty of branding and marketing and the psychology of how we buy and sell things, which is very deep conversation. That's something we should talk about definitely another time. But those are really important is to understand the emotional connection to what you're selling or promoting, and understanding who you are as a brand just allows you to have that conversation in a much easier fashion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to disagree with you, but I don't have anything to disagree on, so I'm not gonna.
We'll find something. We'll have one conversation where it's just like, I'm going to talk about meat the whole time, and you can go, so
no, there you go.
It'll be a different
right.
though.
You're right.
But yeah, so the next
Your
one,
vegetables again.
No, vegetables are good, but a piece of meat on the side.
Sure.
So primary customer personas. When we work with clients to establish their brand, depending on how deep the project is, we'll actually go beyond the primary customer personas, and we'll go ideal customer. So who's the customer you're trying to reach? We'll go the fringe customers, the ones that they're here, they're maybe not your primary target, but you don't want to necessarily alienate them. Okay. But then we'll also go anti-personas, who your customers are not. And I think it's really important for people to understand most businesses do not apply well to just, we sell to everybody, or we're so broad.
Please stop.
Exactly.
Please
niche down as much as you possibly can, and then speak to them, sell to them, be emotionally connected to them. Understanding who your customer isn't is a really good mechanism to be able to filter down decisions from an organizational standpoint, from a marketing perspective. You're not trying to cast the widest net. You are trying to cast a net that's specific to the thing that you're looking for. That's a really important aspect of understanding who your primary or target customer persona is, and then being able to define that in a very repeatable way.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I have so much to say. Oh my God. Well, so, okay, one of the things, because you said we have brands, it happens all the time when someone comes to you and says, design my brand identity. Okay, who are you talking to? Everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then between the ages of 0 to 100, right? Living everywhere with all kinds of, that doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. And you also said that it's a very good idea to say who you're not for. And we see this all the time with websites. Especially, I see a lot of service providers. They say this service is for, but this is not for you if. And that's a really smart way of basically choosing the right people. I mean, they self-select.
Yeah.
And that's also, it allows you to not waste time.
Yeah.
A lot of customers that it's not a fit. We live in times when we can, to an extent, pick and choose our customers and the people that we want to have a relationship, because ultimately branding is having relationships. And the last thing I want to say in this, so many words, a differentiator for a company, from my experience, is the most difficult thing for clients to find.
Sure.
And they do understand why they're doing what they're doing. They do understand what they're selling. They understand their customers, but they don't know what makes them different. And the reality of it is that there are so many other companies that do the same thing. Yeah. Even if your product is superb or your service is superb, if there's nothing that differentiates you,
you're absolutely right in terms of differentiation. But the problem is that people assume everybody understands why they're different.
Yeah.
So you said people understand their why. I think inherently people understand why they're doing something, but if you don't verbalize it, if you don't intentionally set it and make sure everybody else is on the same page, nobody knows your why.
Sure.
You just assume they do because it's like everybody gets it. I mean, it's so obvious what it is. But if you can't articulate it, if you can't write it down, if you can't build it in a repeatable fashion, then nobody's going to get it. Even internal. One of the things that I found, I always say that strategy equals alignment, that it's really critical that an organization of any size should be aligned and moving in the same direction. But if you assume the other person understands or has your same perspective, they just don't. You can be close, but I always say that all these things should be written down, and they should be used to actually
laminated.
Laminated. Everybody has it in like a little book, but they should use it to make decisions. They should use it in meetings to understand what they're trying to accomplish. At an organization that I was at previously, our goal was to make cyclists faster. That was our why. but we didn't originally have that defined. And in our software product, we had this challenge essentially, and it took athletes out of their training and punished them for a week. It was a really hard challenge. And once we defined our why of making cyclists faster, we understood that that's wrong. That goes against what we're trying to actually accomplish. So it was very easy to say, no, we need to get rid of this feature. But until we established our why and defined it as an organization, just like, oh, this is great.
So what was the why?
To make cyclists faster.
Well, but why?
Because we wanted to make cyclists faster. Yeah, you're not going to do the 5 whys on me. I know what you're trying to do. No, that is the why. But I think the why does not have to be this altruistic, I'm making the world a better place thing. It can be. I mean, certainly certain organizations need to do that and want to do that. But you should at least go deeper than that first thing. Why do you do it? Oh, we want to make people happy. I'm like, well, why do you want to make people happy? Well, why do you want to do that? It's not a service level exercise. Like, it's something that does need to have some time spent behind it and thought put into it. But it also doesn't need to be this like so deep Zen-y kind of concept. It just has to feel accurate, authentic, and be intentional.
Yes, I do have to agree. The interesting thing about why and finding that why, like you said, it doesn't have to be altruistic. It can be.
Sure.
If that's the brand that you are building, and if those are the kinds of values that you want to, build a relationship upon, that's great. But yes, you can, even if your brand why and your brand story, for example, because sometimes they're right, very cross-pollinated, you can say, I had a horrible experience in my life and I just don't want that to ever happen to anyone else.
Sure.
For example.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But what I see a lot, especially with micro businesses, is people who start companies because they're solving their own problem.
Sure.
Happens a lot. And I feel like they often get very disappointed because they think that everyone has the same problem and that they're solving their problem, but they're honestly trying to solve their own.
Yeah.
And might not work.
So I guess we have some slightly disagree with, because I do agree with the sentiment of that, but I also feel I've been in technology and startup world a lot in my life, that is a really good way to see if there's a business there. Is you have a problem, you solve that problem, and then, hey, does anybody else have this problem? But if you blanket hang your hat on just because I have this experience that everybody else does too, that's a little short-sighted.
I think it should be the other way around, though. It shouldn't be, hey, I have this problem and I built something to solve it. Does anyone have the same problem? Hey, I have this problem. To me, that's the way it should go. I have a problem. Does anyone else have this problem? And then build stuff, right?
That's, we're getting into the nuance of it. But yeah, it's depending on how you develop that business. Could be an MVP or, like just a quick prototype of like, hey, do this.
But people don't do that, though.
A lot of people do.
Okay, techie. You're techie.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Techie.
That's what I mean. In like tech world, people are doing that constantly. I do that constantly. So I think, and that kind of comes back to steering the ship. Like, how far are you going into something? And that's maybe a little less branding and more just business development. But I think it's a really critical thing to at least address and talk about.
Sure.
So one more thing on the primary personas before we move on to the messaging framework, because you did touch on the framework that I want to go into a little bit. The one thing that is really important about personas is that it isn't just demographics. It isn't just age, income, location. Those are really important because it gives you a baseline for marketing and targeting. So you, again, like targeting, I think it's an okay word, but not the best word. Audience enablement, I don't know, that's probably not a good word either. But it allows you, when you're buying ads, to be able to say, okay, I want to target this age range in this location. But you need to understand their struggles. You need to understand their emotional connection to whatever your product is or service, and how the thing that you're doing is going to solve those problems. So considering your personas on an emotional level, not just a data point level, is really critical for the brand specifically, but also for marketing initiatives too. So it's, again, personas are not just a spreadsheet of Sally something and she's 22 and she lives in Southern California. What is she trying to solve? What is her struggles in her family or her career? It's going deeper than just the service level data.
Well, and I'm sighing because there's a lot that goes into it, and I have so much appreciation for research, but the idea of actually conducting research for me is painful.
Sure.
Is tedious and painful. But of course, you can generalize a lot of these things. But oh my gosh, Elliot Aronson, social psychologist, I think 50s, 60s. There were many different experiments in social psychology that basically says that we can predict a lot of the things that people do, especially in terms of conformity and following, and it's true. I agree with that. But then at the same time, if there's a human factor in it, there's always a level of being unpredictable, right? You can't assume that this is exactly what they're going to do. So I guess what I'm saying is I want people who build brands to understand who they're talking to, but then I also don't know if having such a detailed explanation of what they do and what they are is that useful.
The one thing that I think is important to kind of clarify about a persona is it's not indicative of a single individual. It's more of a pool of individuals. The more that you can connect a person to what you're talking about, it just creates a little more emotional connection and empathy. Sally something is your persona, but Sally represents an audience of people.
So the similarities between
the similarities. So it's a group of similar people in similar either stages of life or in terms of what they're looking for, their struggles, and that's kind of how you bucket it together. But yeah, I think depending on what your product is or depending on what your service is, maybe you could go deeper, but it's really just a way to create a framework of, okay, this is our target audience. This is who we're trying to reach. This is what their struggles are. This is how we solve those struggles. But then it's really important to back that up with data. Because again, maybe in the beginning you won't even have it. And maybe it's just all assumption. Our audience is this. This is what I'm trying to sell to. And then as you either sell to that person, get more customer data, whether you actually do the time and do the research, then it should adjust those. So your persona isn't a fixed feature of your company. It's something that you should revisit every quarter or every 6 months or however long it makes sense for your organization. But it should modify depending as you get more and more data, because the likelihood of it is that you have a picture of who this audience is in your mind, and that will change over time because you just were wrong, or maybe your product has evolved or your market has evolved, or the way that you reach with your customers on social media or email or whatever, it changes who that audience is. So it's really more of a guide stick for you to guide how you speak, how you promote, how you market to those individuals.
I have to agree with you.
You sounded so disappointed.
No. Well, the worst thing is that I don't want to interrupt you, and I have all these thoughts and like all these things I want to talk about, but then the moment you stop talking, and I'm like, shit, I forgot. So that's why I sound disappointed, but I'm not. Absolutely, I'm not.
Okay. Well, I think we've talked about personas. I think people probably understand what persona is now. So the next one is the messaging framework.
Okay.
I don't have a hard, fast rule on how messaging frameworks need to be prepared or created. There's lots of them out there that you can use, or you can just make your own up, honestly. But to me, having something set of this is how we speak. These are the things that we say about our organization. This is where we would say this. And even if you should do kind of like a 3 version. So when it's like, the single line sentence, the one that's the elevator pitch, and then maybe the one that you put into press releases or whatever. It could be anything, but just what are the things that you say? And that allows anybody interacting with your organization or potentially copywriters. Cool. I have an understanding of who we are. It can go much, much deeper than that. MailChimp had a really good voice and tone guideline. I don't know if it exists anymore, and they went pretty deep. They would showed examples of if a customer asks this question, this is how we reply, not like this.
Okay.
So it got really deep in terms of tone and terminology and, giving good examples about, okay, I can feel how this brand speaks to me.
But that is super important. And I've actually worked on creating brand identities and branding with copywriters who don't understand the voice and tone, and that makes them unable to produce examples.
Yeah.
And if you can't produce examples, then people who are going to use this brand voice and tone will definitely not be able to do that.
Yeah.
And those examples are really helpful. So I don't even know if that's necessarily going so deep. I think giving people an example of how they talk and what kinds of things they say is actually kind of crucial.
And I think it depends on the size of the organization. I've worked with lots of small businesses, nonprofits that never have a copywriter. It's just whoever's working in that organization is writing the copy. But even for them, it would be helpful for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's just interesting because I feel like if you have a defined brand, and to me, that's the metaphor that I will use is just seeing a person, right? Because the brand for me is kind of like a person very vividly.
Yeah.
And if they're clear and if they're vivid, then it's so much easier to make decisions on their brand identity, on their messaging, voice and tone, and all these things, and personality, right? All those things are connected. But it kind of hurts my heart when there's there's a brand that's defined and there's a brand that's defined as far as visual identity, but that messaging part gets lost.
Yeah.
And have to nail it down. We have to know what we're talking, because oftentimes you have so many different people working on a brand. And it's horrible when people are, overthinking in their decisions, like, should I say this? Should I say something else? How do I talk about this? And then it turns out that what they thought was obvious, that it was on brand, someone says, I don't know where they came from.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes back to the assumptions that, oh yeah, no, we know what we say. We know that the brand. Everybody's individual perception is just slightly different or vastly different. What I think is an empathetic word, maybe you don't, or, vice versa. So yeah, I think having anything is better than nothing. But I do think, to your point, that having some more established examples or having some kind of proof in the pudding of this is how we talk about in these situations will only help people. Tchotchke.
Yeah. Pudding.
Proof in the pudding.
I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't had a pudding since I was like 10. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
I can't think of it. Tangents.
There you go. Tangent.
Okay. And then the last but not least, at least in this, the 5 critical things, is the actual visual language, or what does this look like? What are the colors, the fonts, the type treatments, I guess type treatments and fonts are very similar in terms of what people. We know the difference, but yes, we know the difference as designers. But I think a few critical things within that is your identity, your colors, what you look like on social media, if that's your audience, which a lot of companies obviously are on social media. And then what does your online presence look like, whether it's your website or if you need collateral. In the day and age of digital, lots of companies don't really even have collateral anymore in terms of packaging or print materials or portfolios or brochures, but a lot of companies still do, obviously. But those core pieces will at least establish your brand visual language. So that way, when somebody looks at you on social, then goes to your website or gets an email, there's at least a consistent branding feeling to it. That goes so much deeper depending on your market, your audience, your company. It could be t-shirts, it could be vehicle wraps, it could be actual signage on a building. There's so much. But I think logo, website, social, those are the kind of baseline pieces. Because again, if you and I are building a brand, we go deep into what does this brand look like and feel like from a visual perspective. If a small business or a nonprofit, or even some more established business that this hasn't been a purview, they're not going to go as deep as us if they're not using a service or another agency that does these kind of things. But understanding logo, understanding some colors, a color consistency, they say that, and I'm not going to get the number right, but it's more than 50% of the first impression is color. People can recognize a brand purely by color. And that's really important for us as designers. It's like, well, yeah, of course. But
I'm laughing because that reminds me, and I don't think you were there, but Tap In, the people from Tap In, our friends, you did the trivia night. And one of the questions, there was a whole panel about like branding questions. And one of them was, they showed a Pantone color and they said, what is the brand? But it was right.
Green.
Yeah, but it's so clear that that's what it is. And they can basically claim that color.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's super important. Yeah. So again, I'll just kind of run through them again real quick, but the 5 critical things are: establish your why, what, and how. Create your brand narrative, which is your voice, your feeling, and your impact. Your primary customer persona, at least your primary customer persona, maybe more if you have time or the energy to do it. Create some form of messaging framework, and then establish your visual language so that way people know what you look like. And because it's important. Yeah,
exactly. But all of those things are kind of like a skeleton, right? I mean, with meat, it's skeleton with meat.
Sure.
But then how that gets out into the world, that's marketing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't want people to think, great, I'm done. Right? Like that's all I need. And then my brand is going to be successful.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily.
Yeah.
I
mean, you can have the most beautiful thing, and if it sits in a room by itself, no one knows that it's beautiful.
But that's also one of the things that I realized as a designer working in-house, that a lot of designers don't understand that spending an incredible amount of time polishing something, like, that's art for the sake of art. But if it doesn't go out into the world, it does nothing.
Yeah.
It does nothing for that brand.
Yes.
And that's also the difference between a designer and an artist.
Sure.
Right? Artists think of their own problems and they solve it for themselves. and designers solve other people's problems.
Yeah.
And if they can't, then
don't let perfection, outweigh progress. Yeah. And then,
thank you for the reminder.
yeah, absolutely. I don't think I've ever been an artist. I've always been a designer. Even when I was young, I wanted to draw comics and I wanted to do 3D animation for movies and video games, and it just progressed, but it was never, I'm going to create this art because I have a feeling and I need to get out. And that's amazing. Art is amazing. And as creatives, and we both, appreciate, and it's so critical to our culture and feeling and all the things. I can't even describe it. It's so important, but it's not design. You can have a huge overlap between the two, but design is solving a problem. It is selling a product. It's getting a message out there. And art is usually more for the creator's ability to express something.
Yes. Well, I'm sighing right now because I have friends who are definitely more on the artistic side of things. And, this feeling of them not being compensated enough and not being recognized for their talents is a thing. It's real. But then I'm thinking, okay, so let's say that you have a talented illustrator and their illustrations are art in a way. They're very personal, and you hire them for their particular style. And you know that if they produce something, we know that it's them because they're so clear in their style. Is that art, or is that design, or is it both?
100% both. Yeah. If an illustrator is just creating illustrations in their room just because they want to create them, then that's art.
Yep.
If they're creating illustrations to sell a product, to get a message across, to achieve some type of business goal, then that's design. But again, it's nuanced, but it's the objective behind the art, I think, is critical. I think branding is art. I think business strategy is art. I think anything with a strategic goal just defines itself as not self-serving artistry.
I disagree.
Yeah?
Yeah. I mean, artistry in the sense of a craft, yes. But art in the sense of art, no. I think it's design. Totally design, because it is, again, solving someone else's problem. I mean, if we go by that definition, right, that would be it. But I think that there is a big part of the process of branding that's intuitive, and I'm not saying artistic per se, but there's a lot of intuition. It's if you only, and again, to me, there's one point when I get information about a brand and I talk to the founder, I have a clear understanding of what that brand is, how they communicate, what they would look like. If I don't, then that's a problem, because that means that they don't know, they haven't defined it. And I will try to ask them a lot of questions to pull it out from them. Mm-hmm. But there happened several clients happened to me, you could say, where I don't know. I'm blank. Like there's nothing here. And that also comes back to the differentiator, right? There's nothing that differentiates you. I don't want to say impose, but I can make up something. I can think of a differentiator for you, but you're not going to accept it and you're not going to run with it because it's not you.
It's not authentic to them. Yeah. We're saying the same things in just different ways, because this is not the things that we do. I believe branding is art because of what you can create from doing these branding exercises. But these exercises aren't rocket science. They're not magic. It's not we come in and we're the only ones that can create a brand because we have the experience to. We have the experience.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah,
we are.
Magic. Yeah. We have the experience and the ability because we've spent our careers doing this. But if you ask the right questions, if you do the right prompts, not AI prompts, but prompts in terms of conversation, if you build the right data set, you can create a brand because of those things. And then because of our creative prowess, which is a ridiculous thing to even say, but our experience, we are able to do that in a much more efficient and deliberate and ideally higher quality way because, again, our experience. Anybody, as long as they go through the exercises of intentionally setting things, they can still create a good brand. Maybe they don't have the design chops to build a beautiful logo, because again, that takes time and energy. But for them to sit down and, why am I doing this? Who is my target audience? Like, how do we sound? What words do we want to use? That's something that most businesses should be able to at least attempt. And then if they need help, then they obviously bring people like us to really push it forward and create that kind of higher level type of branding.
Okay. So we've been talking for quite a while. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can continue talking for the next 5 hours or 5 days.
I'm sure we could.
There's always something to talk about, and it is fascinating. But what key takeaways do we want business owners, founders, designers to take from our conversation?
Yeah, there's a few things. The key one is that branding is not a single aspect of an organization. It's all of the things. It's the logo. It's how you talk. It's your colors. It's your website. It's the intention that you put behind your marketing. The brand is a bigger piece than most people just, branding, like your logo. Like it's, no. It's, whoa. Hold on. It's not your logo. It's all these things.
Brand experience.
Yeah, it's everything about your brand. Like, and you said at the very beginning, it's the perception that people hold in your mind when they think about you.
Mm-hmm.
That's your brand. Branding and marketing are two different sides of the same coin. You need marketing to be able to promote and talk about and be in the world. Like you have to be able to have some mechanism to promote your brand and be out there in front of your audiences. And then it needs to be intentional. You need to actually spend time to develop your brand. It's not something that just happens. There is some natural aspect of what your brand could be or what it is, just because your culture is something that you can't stop from being in existence. But unless you sit down and discuss it and try to establish some of these things, it's never going to take that full shape. It needs to be defined and packaged a little bit better. There's lots of things you can do, but I think it's establishing your why. It's creating your brand narrative. It's knowing who your target audience is. It's creating some form of repeatable messaging framework, and then your baseline visual language. If you have those pieces, you're already ahead of the game of a lot of competitors.
Yes, absolutely.
There's lots to it, but I think those are the key things.
Cool. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good summary of branding. Yeah. There was so many other things that we touched on. We could just talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, we got to save some episodes.
Yeah.
Episodes.
Agreed.
Cool.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks. Cool.
That was great.
Until next time. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, your brand story is yours to define.
Follow us at Co-Branded for more tips and strategies. Stay curious, stay creative, and we'll catch you next time.